And welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavier joining you. It is Friday, October 17th, and we're getting ready for IU homecoming as the Hoosiers take on the Michigan State Spartans. What's been historically a one-sided series with the biggest point spread I think we've ever seen in the series, but it's in Indiana's favor. And this is not a series that is lopsided in favor of Indiana. Quite the contrary. Michigan State historically more successful in this series, but Indiana in a really good spot as they come into this game, 6-0, ranked third in the country. And the talk of college football, for reasons we'll get into immediately after we recognize our presenting sponsor, Home Field Apparel, who, of course, made this delightful little 500 shirt and many other shirts that you can get your hands on either on the website at homefieldapparel.com or at the Home Field at Tracks location, which is a good one. I'd recommend going and checking it out. Their first brick and mortar store. It's right down the street from Nick's. It's right there in the middle of Kirkwood Avenue, and some amazing IU apparel and new stuff in there all the time. Also, not sure if you folks saw, Home Field announced not just a new IU drop. You have the Emerging Superpower shirt, which I highly recommend picking up. You got a nice Bison shirt, but they also dropped Bison Mafia shirts. Our buddies over at Upstairs Pub partnering with Home Field Apparel, and that's already been a very successful item. So check them out. Go to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. But you can also just go to Tracks as well, and they would love to take care of you down there. So let them know that we sent you, and we may be live there next week. So you may want to stop by and check us out there. Planning preliminarily 5 p.m. on Friday, the 24th, live at Home Field at Tracks. We'll come back with more details, so just watch the podcast or watch the Twitter feed. You'll find more information out there. But we, as always, appreciate you folks for joining us here on the show. We've got actually 2 episodes dropping today. One of them is going to be this one, what you're watching right now, which I'm going to talk about the big news from the week, but we'll also talk through the matchup between Michigan State and Indiana. And then another podcast where Scott and I come to you live from the Posh Hotel talking about everything that's happened. Now, that was recorded just before the Signetti extension news dropped, so no talk about that, but talk about everything else. And I think you'll enjoy that as well as we recapped the first part of the season and talked about the expectations moving forward. So anyway, let's talk Signetti extension. I think that's what everybody would like to hear. I did do a live podcast on Assembly Call last night. I was driving. I didn't get a ticket this time, so that was a win for everybody. If you don't know the backstory on that, I think I talk about it a little bit on the show. But go to Assembly Call. Coach Tonsoni, Ryan Phillips had me on. We talked about not just the terms of the extension, but just the overall, what it means. Like, what's the vibe overall from that? And, how much it matters to IU to have Curt Cignetti in place. So that is a good segment. Go check it out if you get a chance to. And this, I want to talk about a little more in depth, kind of picking up on some of the things that we talked about on that show. But, the big thing, when the news came down, I wasn't surprised because I had been told by several people that, yes, there was going to be, they felt good about the idea that Signetti was not going to go anywhere. And it's always tough, I feel like, for Indiana fans in these circumstances because they deal with a lot of outside noise if you're on social media, fans of other programs, and people who are just kind of really out to harsh the vibe, I think, as the kids would say, regarding the way that you should look at Indiana football. And if you've been online at all, whether it's message boards or social media, maybe even like out in the wild, I'm not sure. Most of the time people don't talk like that in person, but it's always, there's something wrong. Remember, like, first, like, oh, Indiana isn't that good, they're going to lose this game or they're going to lose that game. Then it was, well, Indiana, discount their season because they didn't play tough enough opponents. Or, well, gosh, they lost to the 2 national finalists on the road. That must have meant they were a bad team. And then it was this year, well, gosh, Indiana, their non-conference schedule is awful, even though it actually wasn't. And then it was, oh, well, Indiana, they're not going to match up against Illinois at home. And then they blew Illinois out. Well, Illinois must not have been very good. You finally win at Oregon, and people run out of things to say in response. But the reality of the situation is you can't explain away a win at Oregon when so few teams do it. A couple of people tried, but you can't explain it away. Like, it just doesn't work. And ultimately, what I look at with this Indiana team with Signetti is A, it's amazing news, and B, there's going to be certain people that are going to try to poo-poo it one way or another. A good friend of mine texted, "Oh, it's adorable. You people think that means he's actually going to stay." This is where it needs to stop. Indiana gave Curt Cignetti a huge contract, and it means the following things. It means, A, Curt Cignetti's not going anywhere. His family loves it here. He loves it here. He has really been sincerely moved by the support of the IU fan base, and he's built something here that will sustain as a legacy far greater, I think, than anything he could do at another program, given all of the circumstances that we're talking about. He's also at a place that has decided that it likes to spend money on football, that it likes to be good at football, and it wants to keep him around because he's the best possible guy for the job. I think all of those things are simultaneously true. And when you think about what it means, there was a great article from Nicole Auerbach from NBC Sports about what the Signetti contract means and why it's so important. There was a tweet, I don't remember if it was Stuart Mandel or Dan Wetzel, I think it was Stuart Mandel, where he talked about how the fact that IU was able to retain Signetti and is paying him as the third highest paid coach in college football is actually great for college football. I think Nicole Auerbach said much of the same thing, because this normally doesn't happen in college football. What normally happens when you have a great coach who has a lot of success at a program that isn't a blue blood is that a blue blood comes in and plucks that coach away, and the cycle of misery starts anew. You saw that, ironically, with Vanderbilt and James Franklin, where he had a great run of success at Vanderbilt. Did they hang on to him? Did they build around him? Were they given that opportunity? No. He went off for the first big job that he could find. And when you've had situations like that, you often find yourself thinking, well, gosh, is this cycle ever going to change? Are we ever going to see a circumstance where a program that is not part of that upper tier is able to hang on to their guy? And there's very limited examples of that really happening in college football, at least in the modern era. You saw it a little bit more in the 70s and 80s and 90s because it felt like the delta between the top teams and the teams that were not contenders was not quite as great. Yeah, you had obviously the Ohio States, although they had a kind of a rough 80s. You had the Michigans; they didn't achieve as much as you'd think. The USCs, the Notre Dames, but you also had, like Georgia won a national title early in the 80s, and Clemson did. And I know these sound like commonplace names now, but then those teams kind of receded into that 6, 7, 8 win range or worse for a long time. In this era, it just hasn't happened as much. And it feels like the talent, both the player talent and the coach talent, has increasingly congregated at the top. And even a guy like Nick Saban, who everybody remembers as being, head coach at Alabama, obviously, head coach at LSU, before that stint with the Dolphins. But that was a guy, coached at Michigan State. Did Michigan State hang on to him? No, he progressed to what he perceived was a better program. So I think there's a lot of really positive things you can take out of this, if you're Indiana and if you're a fan of college football parity. One of the things that was warned about the NIL era was that it was going to somehow hurt parity. Like, oh, well, parity will be destroyed and everybody will just go to the same 2 or 3 programs. And we've seen the exact opposite. And we've talked about that on this show. We've talked about it on Football Weather, where, the fact that Indiana is an odds-on favorite to make the college football playoff for the second year in a row could potentially go to the Big Ten title game. The fact that Vanderbilt's been good, the fact that Texas Tech is a legitimate top 10 team. I mean, these are not things that felt like they could have happened in even like 5 years ago. And as much as Indiana had tried to pour in to their football program, the reality of the situation is that it never felt like it was going to be enough to really compete. And now all of a sudden it is. And whatever you might hear from people about, well, you don't really want to spend that much money on a coach. Like, I don't recall hearing complaints about that with any other team. it is jarring to the college football landscape that Indiana has not only hired a great coach in Curt Cignetti, who has a great staff. These people are expert talent evaluators. They're expert, game planners. They've done amazing job with development of the various players that they brought into this program or the players that were here, and they've crafted a team that's better this year than the team that went to the playoff last year. Like, all of those things are true. But the fact that they were able to retain that coach wants to be here, that coach was willing to accept a probably a better than market value contract, and that Indiana was willing to put those resources forward financially, and that they were able and willing to put those resources forward financially for Signetti's assistance in this past offseason, whether it was Bryant Haynes getting offers from elsewhere, whether it was the strength and conditioning coach getting offers. There's probably others that we don't know about. Like, all of that adds up to an amazingly positive feeling if you're an IU football fan about the commitment that this university's made to football and the commitment that Curt Cignetti's made to the university. It feels like an alternate reality in a lot of ways if you've been an IU football fan for a long time. And if you haven't been an IU football fan for a long time, if you've just come to this in the last year or two, or even in the last 5 years, this has been just a remarkable turn of events. And when you think about how much optimism there was at the end of 2019 going into 2020, and certainly that 2020 year going into 21, and then the nosedive it took, the people that I'm the happiest for, and I count myself in this, I mean, I'm not a neutral observer when it comes to IU football, as you all know, is it felt like after finally getting to a point where Indiana had become nationally relevant, that it all had gone away. And that the promise of the Allen era and everything that had happened had just evaporated, and Indiana was right back to where it had been in the early 2010s. And so to turn around again and not only have that historically great season last year, but to build on it this year, and then for IU to say, we're not going anywhere, we're going to commit to this, this is our identity now as an athletic department and a football program. I mean, for all the complaints that people had during the Fred Glass era, or even parts of the Dolson era, about why aren't we spending more money on this, or why aren't we doing more in relation to football, that's happening now. And this contract is a great example of the manifestation of that within this landscape. It's remarkable to me. It really is. It doesn't feel real. On both sides. It doesn't feel real that Curt Cignetti wants to be here, and this is where he wants to, essentially build his legacy that will last once he retires. But it's also amazing that Indiana University athletics and the Indiana University donor base has stepped up and said, we know this costs money, but those are resources that we need to invest in keeping this football program strong. And the implications of that, not just for the football program, but for the athletics program in general, and for what the university needs to continue to market itself in this landscape where, college enrollments are going to be more in jeopardy. You're going to be competing against other schools in a way that you've never been competing against them before for applications, for interest. It's amazing how it's all come together. And it's amazing how much the desire to do well at this, and when you make a good hire, because as we know, and we've talked about this many times before on the show, good hires are hard to come by. And we've seen okay hires, not just here, but elsewhere. Hires that are halfway there, but maybe don't actually equate to the real thing, so to speak. To make a hire that is so profound in its impact that you've got people across the country. I'm reading Reddit threads and I'm reading feedback from fans. I was reading one from a Purdue fan, and maybe it might have been a Twitter thread, but it's like, I am so upset about this because this guy is so good. Signetti is so good at what he does. These people are so good at talent evaluation. These people are so good at coaching and game planning that it makes them mad, because I think everybody outside that had a rooting interest that was directly tied to some kind of competition with IU is like, I don't want to see Indiana continue to have this success. I don't want to see Indiana continue to build. And it was funny. I was seeing SEC fans who were like, wow, we're thrilled for you guys, mostly because we don't want to coach against Signetti in the SEC. And I just wonder what the limit is. Like, what is the ceiling for Indiana football now? This is a coach that has shown that he can compete at the highest levels of college football without a lot of 4 and 5 stars. But this is the kind of financial commitment that starts to get you in the room with those 4 and 5 stars. We've seen that in recruiting already. We've seen that in the battles that Indiana is having right now over players that'll be in this program in the future. And we also saw it in the transfer portal this last year. I mean, folks like Fernando Mendoza right now could easily be a Georgia Bulldog. And there was a moment in time back in December where it looked like that was going to be what was going to happen. And Fernando Mendoza has been a revelation. And yes, he's very talented, but he's also getting the benefit of the coaching and the mentorship of Chandler Whitmer, of Mike Shanahan, of Curt Cignetti. Roman Hemby could have gone anywhere, but he chose to come to Indiana because he wanted to be coached by this group of coaches. He wanted to be part of this team. Players see this. Like, players see it. They hear it. They hear the buzz. They watch the McAfee show, or they watch at least the clips. They see what is in store for them if they want to go play football at Indiana, that they get to play for this coaching staff and they get to be part of this team that has decided that success is their mission. That's exciting. And that's what you are able to secure. And all of this crap, like the Paul Feinbaum crap today about, well, he hasn't really accomplished anything. It's not naive. It's purposeful, but it is a purposefully, it's a statement that's out of sequence with reality, because if you all know anything, you know that IU football is maybe the hardest place to win in the Power 2 conferences, historically speaking, but it isn't anymore. And we have Curt Cignetti to thank for that, but we also have Scott Dolson, Fred Glass before him, for building the foundation that allowed even this moment to come into existence. So I couldn't be happier. I think it's amazing that he committed so quickly. And I think, of all things, it just demonstrates, like, this was where Curt Cignetti wanted to be. And it's thrilling to think that, because this is a guy who waited a long time for this type of a job. And it's not just that he's found a home at Indiana. It's that Indiana has decided it wants to be the home for a coach that wants to take it to the highest level. And I think we can all be thrilled by that. So it's also great because it takes that distraction out of the water for the rest of the season. This is a great football team that Indiana's got. I'm not saying they're going to go undefeated. Like, the little part of my brain that sat through all these seasons where Indiana struggled to win 3 or 4 games is never going to let me say, yes, Indiana's going to go undefeated in the regular season. But this is a really good football team, and the pathway is there. And it starts this weekend as the Hoosiers take on Michigan State. And let's talk about that game a little bit. We'll get to our preview, as this is not a Michigan State team that's doing well so far this season. They're not like abjectly terrible, but they are definitely not where they thought they'd be in year 2 of the Jonathan Smith era. This is a team that so far in the season is 3-3, but they've lost 3 games in a row, and they've lost them in kind of progressively worse fashion. Their 3 wins coming into the season, or coming into the conference season, they beat Western Michigan at home 23-6. They won in a shootout against Boston College 42-40, and then they beat Youngstown State, who's an FCS team, 41-24. They go on the road and lose at USC. No shame there. 45-31. They competed against Nebraska, but they end up losing that game on the road 38-27. The shocker was last week when they got blown out at home by UCLA 38-13. And I know UCLA they've caught the breeze here a little bit in the wake of the firing of Deshaun Foster. They've been exciting on offense, but realistically speaking, that's not a great UCLA team, and Michigan State got embarrassed by them in Spartan Stadium. So you look at them on the season, they've been outscored essentially 32-30 so far on the year. That's the averages. They're getting outrushed 4.2 to 3.8. And in terms of some of the other intermediate statistics, they haven't had the passing season I think they would have liked to up to this point. They've been out past 1428 to 1203 in terms of yards. And Aiden Childs, who's been their quarterback, has certainly struggled just with what's being asked of him at this point. I want to go and look at the bite-sized bison statistics, so I'm going to go ahead and call those up right now. As always, we appreciate Taylor Lehman and what he does over at Bite-Sized Bison. It's tremendous work statistically. For those of you who are listening in, you're going to have to trust me when I rattle off the statistics. For those of you that are watching, you'll note that right now I haven't seen a huge amount of purple over the course of the season in terms of the stats. We're seeing some purple here for Michigan State. And I zoom out and take a look at this. I've got this on people's screens. You can see that you look at offense and what Indiana's able to do offensively. They've been really good. They've been 27th in the country in expected points added per play. Michigan State's defense is 123rd in expected points added, like the way they're able to defend that. That's really bad numbers. Indiana is top 5 in passing success. They're top 12 in rushing success. Michigan State's defense is 98th in stopping the pass from a success perspective and 61st in stopping the run. Indiana's converting at a top 15 clip, and Michigan State's defense is really bad in that category as well. Indiana still struggles in explosion rate on offense, but Michigan State has led up a lot of explosive plays. And then you look at things like line yards per rush or third down success, and Indiana is really close to the top of the charts in terms of that stuff. And Michigan State's defense has been okay in stopping line yards per rush, but they've really struggled in third down success. Defensively, Indiana's been one of the top teams in the country in terms of how they play defensively. They really limit EPA per play. They really make teams struggle with conversion rates. We saw that against Oregon. And Michigan State's offense has really not been up to the task. What does Michigan State do well? Well, once they get past the 40-yard line, they're pretty good in EPA per play, but they've struggled to get to the 40-yard line over the course of this season. Their offense is about 65th in the country, according to S&P Plus. Their defense is 77th in the country. Meanwhile, by the same statistics, Indiana's offense is 12th in the country, and their defense is 5th in the country. Michigan State's okay in special teams. They're 38th in the country. Indiana's 8th in the country. According to FEI, which is another good stat that we'll throw up every once in a while, Indiana is 6th in the country in FEI, and Michigan State is 81st in the country in FEI. It's not ideal. Indiana's been great in terms of both offensive and defensive success rates, and Michigan State has not been. They've been about middle of the pack. Indiana's gaining 503 yards a game. That's 8th in the country. And Michigan State's gaining 331 yards a game, which is 110th in the country. And Michigan State's not been great in stopping opponents from gaining yards. So laying all that out and just kind of talking about what we might be looking at overall in this game. Indiana right now is projected by S&P Plus as a 40-14 favorite in this game. So, essentially the margin of victory being 26 or so. Spread's 27.5. So it's right around where that number is. A little bit of money, I think, public money coming on to Indiana simply because they've been so successful this season. Indiana's a 95% probability to win the game. So it does feel like, barring a complete catastrophe and collapse from Indiana, a win is on the cards. And now it becomes a matter of how effectively can you beat Michigan State? Do you score a ton of points on them? Does your defense show up in a big way? How do you measure out what you're going to be doing in this game? And what is the measure of success if you're Indiana? Because at this point, Indiana is kind of fighting two separate battles simultaneously. They're fighting the battle against the teams that they're playing. So how do you fare against a Michigan State? And are you able to beat them? And that's, as Curt Cignetti has brought up many times, anybody's capable of beating anybody in a given game. And so you've got to be vigilant, and especially after a week like this, where your team is coming off the biggest road win in program history, and they're buoyed by the fact that their coach just signed a long-term extension again. That's a great opportunity for some rat poison to leak into things. That's a great opportunity for your team to lose focus. And so Curt Cignetti, as he saw, you got to rip the rearview mirror off, and you've got to go in and be ready to execute. I'm not that worried about IU executing. I really feel like what I saw at Oregon was a dialed-in team that knew what it needed to do to win and was very focused on it, and against a very good team, just out-executed them for the course of the game. Now, how do you do against lesser teams, teams that haven't played as well, teams that aren't as talented or aren't as cohesive? How do you create the scenario where you're able to capitalize on execution, and that becomes the primary thing that you're trying to do out there? And the reality is, Indiana was in this position last year against the exact same team on the road. That was a game I was worried about. That was a game where I looked at it and I was like, well, Indiana does not play historically well at Spartan Stadium. They're coming off two program-defining wins last year against Nebraska and against Washington. And then they had to go to East Lansing and take on a Michigan State team that we thought was frisky. And Indiana started that game very poorly, as you'll recall. And then they woke up and they realized who they were and what they could do. And they absolutely throttled Michigan State in the last three quarters of that game. Taylor mentioned something similar in Bite Size Bison, but it was one of those things where it felt like Michigan State wanted to stop playing. It felt after a while like their offensive line just couldn't take it anymore. So Indiana's been in this position before, I guess, is the point I'm trying to get across. They've been in situations where they've had to put the past behind them. They've had to refocus. And this game, you would get the benefit of being at home, and you get the benefit of, I think, greater clarity about what that process has to feel like. And it's not just the guys that were on the team last year. And this is where Fernando Mendoza, I think, is going to have to mature and learn how to transition. But guys like Roman Hemby have had to deal with, hey, we won a big game. What do we do to transition to the next game? Pat Coogan has certainly been in these situations before. And so I think that leadership helps a ton. And I think that this coaching staff is very, very good, as they've demonstrated over and over again, of getting Indiana to refocus when taking on a lesser opponent who's still dangerous, but is a team that Indiana should beat, and in this case, beat handily. So, looking through the statistics and looking through what Taylor was able to come up with, the things I would keep an eye on in this game, you've got, Aiden Childs as a quarterback, he's got a lot of talent. He has struggled, particularly on first downs, and it's going to be interesting to see how he handles the situation. Assuming he's playing, and I'm assuming that he will, he's one of those guys that when you look at him, he's a great running quarterback. And it's interesting because if you think about it, Indiana's had to deal with running quarterbacks throughout the course of the season. They had to deal with it against Old Dominion. They had to deal with it a little bit against Kennesaw State. That's going to be something that they'll have to keep an eye on as they move through the season. Childs throws the ball downfield a bunch, so that's going to be something we'll have to keep an eye on in terms of, do they try to air it out, and how up to the task will Indiana's secondary be? It's the one small area of concern, and again, it's like everything is relative and everything's in measures. You can talk about, well, gosh, the secondary got burned for a big touchdown against Illinois. They got burned for a big touchdown against Oregon, when both of those were true. And then you think, well, actually, that was all that the secondary got burned for in both of those games. And so there may be a shot or two taken down the field that Indiana concedes, and I think that you've got to be ready for that to occur. But I think for the course of the game, I think Aiden Childs is probably going to find this to be a very difficult defense to throw on, and certainly a difficult defense to run on. One of the fascinating things about the way Indiana played against Oregon was how much they stymied Dante Moore's ability to move the ball with his legs, and how ready to react the linebackers were. Every time he drifted out of the pocket, it created tackles for loss. It created sacks. That was really exciting to see, and I think that bodes well for what Indiana might face in this game. This is not a Michigan State team that does great in terms of success in the passing game. You look at the rankings, they are only ahead of Northwestern, Iowa, UCLA, and Wisconsin in passing success. They are not a very good team in terms of defending against the pass. Only Purdue and Rutgers are worse than that. And you guys have seen Purdue. Purdue's not great. Michigan State's in the bottom half of the conference in rushing success, and they are in the bottom 4 in success against the run. So these all bode well for Indiana. And it looks like the weather's going to hold off. The latest forecast, at least the one I'm seeing at 7 o'clock on Friday evening, is that the rain won't arrive until late in the game. If it arrives at all, it might be breezy, but it's good fall football weather overall. It's going to be a little bit warm, actually. I think it's going to be about 80 degrees at the start of the game. From my perspective, the longer that the conditions can stay good and the longer that Indiana has to establish the game that they want to play, the better off they're going. Like, I think everybody's going to feel about this game. And I think this is a game where Indiana's got the opportunity not just to jump on Michigan State early, but also has the opportunity to generate some turnovers, generate some flip fields for their offense, make it easy to score. I don't think it's going to be easy per se, because I do think Michigan State's got talented players. They haven't played particularly well. They have put up some points at various times. They just haven't been able to keep teams from scoring a ton of points. And that's going to be a fascinating thing to keep an eye on as we move forward in this game, is how frisky does Indiana's offense feel, but also Indiana's defense, I feel like, is on a mission. This is a team that's got a front seven that's as good as any in the country. I'm fascinated to see what they do in this game. I think there's a possibility you could score in all three phases, because I think special teams scoring is absolutely on the table as well. So anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. I mean, it's one of those games where you look at what Indiana can do and what the possibilities are, and I think covering the spread and winning by 28, 31, 35 points, whatever, is absolutely on the cards. It's hard to do that against another Big Ten opponent. It's not impossible, and I think Indiana is good enough that they can do it. Michigan State, they let up as many touchdowns on drives as any team in the country, or any team in the Big Ten. Sorry, not the country. Only UCLA allows as many touchdowns on the end of drives as Michigan State does. So I think Indiana's got a real opportunity to move the ball down the field. And then Indiana's defense has done a great job of stymieing the opponent, holding them to field goals, or holding them to first downs that don't necessarily result in anything down the stretch. So a lot of fun things potentially here for Indiana. You got to get the job done. You got 6 games left in the regular season. You win this game, and, math major here, you've got 5 games left, but you've taken one step towards what your ultimate goal is. And I think for Indiana, it's really at this point just about what's the next page, turn it over. Once you get done with it, get to that next page. And, it's basically, to go full football coach cliche, it's like 6 one-game seasons to get to where you want to get to. And, remember what Curt Cignetti said in his first interview with Big Ten Network when he got hired. It was about being in the Big Ten title game in Indianapolis. And that's right there for Indiana, but it starts with this game. We'll see what they're able to do as they try to get themselves on that pathway moving forward. Anyway, that'll wrap it up for this one. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed the episode from the Posh Hotel as Scott and I evaluated what went on this season. If you didn't get a chance to catch that, go check it out. It's elsewhere in the Back Home Network feed. Our thanks to our friends at the Back Home Network. Assembly Call, back in business. Looking forward to hearing them talking basketball. We'll chip in with some basketball thoughts here as well. I'm Galen Clavio. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.